have you forsaken me? Forsaken me, forsaken me. Oh God, have you forsaken me? Forsaken me.
You may be thinking, okay, Pastor, what was that all about? He's really brought down the vibe, right? Because, we just, it's Easter, right? Bright colors, and we just came here for the eggs, and you throw something like, all heavy at us. Well, the reason is, I think, because for us to understand why Easter is happy, why it's a celebration, we need to be willing to have an honest conversation about the fact that that doesn't necessarily feel like our reality all the time. Right? I think a lot of times we get together and we may put on a mask in order to engage in, right? Because I'm supposed to get up here and go, he is risen, and y'all all go, he is risen indeed, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do, right? And sometimes that can feel fake. And sometimes you can come in and you're dealing with stuff like what you see in that video, and this many people in a room. I'm sure there are people who are experiencing or have experienced some of those things. The death of someone that you love, or your marriage coming apart, or a medical emergency and not knowing whether someone you love is going to make it, being bullied or rejected or abused, all of those things. And I feel like we have to be willing to be honest with those things if we're going to understand the power of Jesus in them. We have to be willing. I loved what Sarah shared. And by the way, we don't coordinate. None of, God puts all that together. You would think that we do, right? We live in the same house. But, I love what she shared, just the authenticity of her doubts and her struggles and the pain of experiencing that. And we have to be willing to move beyond just the cliches and me telling you, hey, it's all going to be okay, for you to really understand the power of the empty tomb. It has to have power in your real life, and we got to be honest. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Right? That word, those words that were sung over and over again in that video, "My God, have you forsaken me?" We have to be honest that sometimes we feel those words are what's real in our life. And it's okay for us to acknowledge that and feel that, because those aren't just random words. Those are the words of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 27, as Jesus is hanging on the cross, it says at about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" That's Jesus' words of feeling abandoned by God, his Father. And what that means for us is this, is that those feelings that we have that you may feel alone in, and maybe you don't feel like you can share them because, to feel abandoned by God, right? That's not okay. It's not Christian to feel that way. And yet that is what Jesus cries out from the cross. And it tells us something incredibly powerful about Jesus and about our situation. And it tells us really what the significance of Easter is. We talk about the celebration of the empty tomb, and we're supposed to be talking about that the empty tomb is full of power. But what does that mean for me when I feel maybe like God has abandoned me? Maybe that he doesn't listen. Maybe that he doesn't hear my prayers. What does it mean for me in this? And what I want you to see is what we hear from Jesus, what the empty tomb speaks of, is that the empty tomb is full of the power to overcome. Whatever thing that you're walking through, whatever hurt that you carry, the empty tomb is full of the power to overcome that. And the reason that it is full of power is because of what we hear from Jesus, because most of us can resonate with those words that he said. We have felt them. Maybe we've hidden them, but we have felt them. And what the empty tomb reminds us of is that first off, it reminds us that it wasn't empty. It wasn't always empty. There was a dead Jesus in that tomb. And what that means is that the tomb shows us that Jesus walked in our hurts. The God of the universe put on human flesh, and he walked on this earth, and he was hungry, and he was tired, and he was cold, and he gave himself over to our abuse and our rejection, and ultimately he died, and his lifeless body was wrapped up and stuck in that tomb. And so while it's beautiful and nice and pretty to think about the empty tomb, the power of it is that it wasn't empty, that Jesus died and was put in that tomb. The truth is that God draws close to us in our hurt. He's not standing at the finish line of the marathon cheering from a distance hoping you make it. He's running with you step by step. Hebrews chapter 4 says this about Jesus as this high priest, and that's talking about Jesus. He says, "This high priest of ours understands our weakness, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin." He faced all of the same testings we do. All of the hurts that we go through. Whenever in the history of the world and all the many iterations and religions has God subjected himself to all of our pain in order to redeem us? Only Jesus. Jesus walked through that. Whatever it is that you're walking through, maybe you're feeling that unanswered prayer. You've cried out to God over and over again for healing for yourself or for a family member, or you've cried out to God about your marriage or about your kid or your grandkid that you're just trying to asking God to bring them back from the brink and all these things, and you have cried out to God, and so certainly Jesus never experienced unanswered prayer, right? Jesus never experienced that except, in the garden. In Matthew 26, in the night that he was arrested before he was crucified, and he fell on his face to the ground weeping, and he said, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me." He was in anguish about what he was about to experience. And he asked, if it's possible, let this cup be taken from me. Jesus experienced the crying out to God and realizing in that moment that what he cried out to God for was not the will of the Father. He experienced what we would call unanswered prayer. God not moving the way that we would want him to move, the way that we would ask him to move. What about rejection? Matthew 27, Jesus is standing before Pilate and this crowd, maybe some of the same crowd who a week earlier were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and welcoming to Jerusalem. Now the crowd is shouting, crucify him. Pilate says, what should I do with Jesus who's called the Messiah? And the crowd shouted back, crucify him. And listen, Pilate, the pagan Roman governor who couldn't care less about any of these people, who has no reason to care about Jesus or any of them, he says this. He says, what crime has he committed? But the mob, Jesus' own people, roar back, crucify him. His own people reject him. What about abuse? Even though Pilate finds Jesus innocent of all crimes, he still convicts him to die. But then not only that, he hands him over to the soldiers. And in verse 27, it says, some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters, and they called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put on a scarlet robe on him. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head, and they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they spit on him, and they grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified. By the way, this is after they just absolutely shredded him with a whip that had lead tips in the end of it. They mocked him, they beat him, they spit on him, they whipped him. Did he understand abuse? Absolutely. What about feeling abandoned? We have that verse that we read a moment ago where Jesus cries out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You see, in that moment, Jesus for the first time experienced separation from the Father. And look, every one of us experiences separation from God because of our sin, because our sin, your sin and mine, separates us from God. It separates us from our Creator, from our purpose. It separates us from the life that God intended for us to have. But Jesus had never sinned. And so in that moment, he experienced separation from God for the first time. He experienced what you and I walked through. And it wasn't because of his sin. He had none. It was because our sin, all of our sin, was heaped on him on that cross. He took it on himself. He stepped into our hurt. He stepped into our pain, took it on himself, and he experienced separation from the Father as he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then ultimately, death. In verse 50, it says, "Then Jesus shouted again and released his spirit." He experienced physical end of this life and a facing of eternity. And not only did he experience that, but he experienced it with all of our sin on him. To die separated from God. Jesus took that on himself. That's what the tomb reminds us of. That we have a God willing to go through all of that for you and I. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Because he steps into our hurt. Because in your loneliest moments, you have never been alone. In your darkest moments, you have never been alone. Because Jesus steps into that. But the empty tomb also shows that Jesus overcame all of that. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus tells a parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And in this parable, there's a rich man who he has much, but he is not righteous. And there's a beggar who sits at the rich man's table and eats the scraps and has sores, or not at this table, he sits outside of his house and he has sores, and they both die. And the rich man goes into the place of torment, and Lazarus goes into what's described as Abraham's bosom, this place of comfort. And it says that this rich man, he sees Lazarus being comforted, and he is in torment, and he says, please, Abraham, send Lazarus to just drip some cold water on my tongue, because I am in agony here, burning up. And he's told this, it says, and besides, there is a great chasm separating us. No one can cross over to you from here, and no one can cross over to us from there. There's a chasm that no one can cross. No one can cross. Except that Jesus, when he died with all of our sin upon him, crosses that cavern, that chasm. And those feet that you saw in the video, those feet that still had the nail scar in them, they walked across a bridge of his own making, leading, as Ephesians says, a host of captives. Jesus crosses the chasm that nobody can cross. He overcomes the greatest weight that we have, that sin would separate us from God for eternity. Jesus builds a bridge across that chasm. And also this rich man cries out, well, send Lazarus to my brother's house. Send him back from the dead so that he can tell them to change their life so they don't come to this place. And he says, look, no, nobody's going from the dead either to go tell them. No one except Jesus. He walks across that chasm, and then he walks across a bridge from death to life. He walks into life. Out of that tomb. He overcomes sin. He overcomes death. He overcomes the hurt of the world. He overcomes all of that. And so he doesn't just walk along with you powerlessly. He walks along with you to carry you through those hurts. And no, he does not always rescue you from them. But he will walk through them with you and carry you through. And so whatever hurt you are experiencing, whatever pain that you're walking through, he says that he walks through them. He says, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, here's a promise, here on earth, you will have trials. You will have sorrows. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. And so Jesus overcomes our hurt. He gives us the power to overcome, to have victory in him. And so we remember that the empty tomb had Jesus in it, that he enters into our hurt, but we also remember that it is an empty tomb because the nail-scarred feet walked out of it. By his own power, 3 days later, the stone is rolled back and he walks out. But there is something that the empty tomb doesn't do. It doesn't remove the scars. We have to acknowledge that in this life that we will acquire and carry scars. He says, in this world you will have trial. You will have sorrows. And so I want you to understand this, that picture that we get in that video of Jesus' feet walking out after his death, after having cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then walking out. Notice that the nail hole is still there. And in John chapter 20, we read this, that Jesus has risen, and yet the disciples are still in hiding. They're still afraid. They're behind locked doors. And then Jesus appears in their midst. And so this is the risen Jesus. His body is restored. He can do these incredible things like walk through locked doors and show up in a variety of places, just He's ready to ascend into heaven. And yet what does he do? In verse 20 it says, as he spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hand and his side, and they were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. So the risen Jesus carried wounds. This new resurrected body that he had carried the scars. He goes, this is where they did it. This is where the spear was stabbed. This is where they drove those nails in. Following Jesus isn't always neat and tidy. It's not always happy. And there will be scars that we carry. But he bears them too. Because he walks where we walk. Because he doesn't just cheer us on from afar. He joins in the race with us to carry us to victory, to overcome. That's why we can know that the empty tomb is full of power. It is full of the power to overcome. He offers you that power. But also know this. There may be some of you here that, maybe you're here because somebody invited you. Maybe it's because it was expected. The family's all going to be there. But to be honest, you're skeptical of all this. Maybe because it doesn't make sense. Maybe because you've been, hurt by people who said they were believers in Christ. Maybe because it's felt fake to you. You know what? We got to be honest that sometimes it can sound like too much. It sounded like too much to the disciples. In Luke 24, there are some women who go to Jesus' tomb, and they go to anoint his dead body, and when they get there, they discover that it's empty. The stone is rolled away, and there's an angel who tells them he's not here, he is risen. And they go back and they tell the disciples, and this is his own disciples. These are not skeptics. These are not atheists. These are his own disciples. In verse 11 it says, but the story sounded like nonsense to the men, so they didn't believe it. Maybe that's you. Sounds like nonsense. They didn't believe it. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. Stooping, he peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. They said it sounded like nonsense, but there was one, Peter, who said, I need to see for myself. And he went and looked in the tomb. He went in and examined. I want to invite you just to consider a what if. What if Jesus really does love you this much? What if he does have the power to save? I want to share with you the story of a young woman named Kristen who was an atheist. She was absolutely in rejection of the very idea of God. And she was presented with that question of what if? And the answer was unexpected. Let me share with you her story. Watch this short video.
5 years ago, if you'd have told me I'd be sitting here, telling my story of salvation, I would have laughed right in your face, and I would have told you were a crazy Christian. I didn't believe there was hope. I didn't believe in true love. 5 years ago, I didn't even believe in myself. I heard people use the term atheist, and when I decided I knew what that meant, it just was kind of stuck in the back of my mind. Like, I think that's where I fit better than anything. It was more just, there's no such thing as God. Like, if God really cares about people, like all these people say he does, he wouldn't let children starve and cities burn down, and he wouldn't let people get into situations where they hurt each other. I just thought Christians were meddlers, and they took away the rights of people, and they were just trying to create this new world order. I really viewed Christians as evil. I became really combative. Like, I'm not gonna let them get away with this. This is a fairy tale. This is crap. Like, they cannot just come and fill people's heads with this fantasy. I faced life feeling like every day should be awesome and it should be fun, but I did that with drinking and drugs and boyfriends. And if I died, I was buried. That was all I really believed. I met my best friend, who happened to be a Christian, through a past relationship. She was the first friend that really started to talk about Christianity in a different way to me. I remember she took her jacket off, and she had this shirt on with bright pink lettering. It said, "Jesus is my homeboy." I was like, isn't that blasphemous? Like, can you really say that? And she just lived it. I mean, that was about the closest I'd seen to someone really just demonstrating a love for Christ rather than just duty to him. And man, I just remember thinking, like, how am I ever gonna be friends with her if we're so divided on these things? I mean, we had debates. We had heated debates. I really let her have it. I was like, that is the most crazy hogwash I've ever heard. And because I knew her personally, I felt like she really did have my best in mind, that she wanted to break through those hard things with me. And in that time, I met a really awesome guy, and we got close, but probably a little too close, because I got pregnant only a few months after we met. I decided I got to get rid of this problem. I went to a clinic and heard any of the options I had. And that was where a lot started to change. There was this picture this woman handed me, and it was just a dot. But she explained to me that that was a baby. I just started to wonder, like, how on earth that was going to become a life. You know, this had to be something bigger than me. Up until then, I had been so snarky to Christians, but I started to lean in a little more and wonder if maybe what they were saying was true. My best friend had approached me. She basically said, I understand you're really struggling for answers right now. She says, I just want to tell you, like, what if you just gave Christianity a try? She says, because I go to church and I pray, and you'll never know until you know, but I can tell you there are answers. And she says, if you just gave it 1 month, you know, just come to church, and then you can just say at least you tried. I realized she cares more about this faith than being a popular friend right now. That said a lot, because we had been through a lot. For some reason, it just felt like if I could just go, maybe I'll hear something, or at least I can just be alone for a little bit and think. I hid myself up in the balcony, and I actually owned a Bible from all my years of trying to disprove, and the worship team performed Canons by Phil Wickham. There were certain words I vividly, remember reading them on the screen for the first time and just thinking, wow, that's what I feel. Having been an atheist and believing in science, to read the moon and the stars declare who you are. It took me away from that happenstance, and it put me in the position that just like I was created and my baby was created, this whole world, this whole universe was created, and they all proclaim what a power he is. And on a personal level, it says, I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. For me, this didn't make any sense. He can redeem good people, people who've made little mistakes and messed up and didn't say their these and thous or something like that. He doesn't redeem women who are pregnant out of wedlock, who have a path of emotional carnage behind them. And this song was just reminding me, even if you're unworthy, he loves you. We're all unworthy. That's the beauty about grace. It's a gift. You don't get to pick and choose who gets it. You just accept it. And it was after that song and a really powerful message, I finally accepted Christ. But I remember just sitting there, because it wasn't so easy. Because it was almost like I felt bad for him to have to take on everything I lived. It's like I felt bad that Jesus had to own, like, me. And I just remember holding my belly and holding my breath, and I just said, are you sure that you want to save this one? Are you sure? I called him names. I laughed behind his back. I mocked him in public, and I realized I'm no different than all those people that were right in front of him, as he bled. And if he went for them, he went for me too. It's a struggle to believe every single day that Jesus really did die for me. And when someone challenges what I believe now, I remember being that person. I remember taking any opportunity I had to just stick it to the Christian. But now, my faith is so big. It's like, I know where you've been. I know that feeling, and I promise if you give me just a few minutes, I'll talk about it with you. I try to just get them one step closer, one question closer. As much as I know about what it's done for me, it's worth a shot to try to get them to come over too.